Good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us. This webinar forms part of a series of business support webinars brought to you by Sheffield Chamber of Commerce as part of our ongoing support to business following the coronavirus outbreak. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared via Sheffield Chamber's YouTube channel. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sam Christmas and I'm the Commercial Partnerships Manager at Sheffield Chamber of Commerce. I'm delighted to see so many of you have joined us on the webinar this morning. I do hope you're adjusting to this new environment we find ourselves in. I'd just like to welcome our colleagues from Barnsley Rotherham Chamber and welcome their members too. Over the last month, the Sheffield Chamber team and Board of Directors have been holding weekly meetings via video conference to ensure we are up to date with the latest government advice. And we are working closer than ever with the British Chambers of Commerce and the wider Chamber network to assist and support our membership and the wider business community as best we can. As part of this support, Sheffield Chamber are aiming to bring you 2 to 3 webinars a week, with the aim of sharing as much information with you all as possible, while also offering you a platform to ask questions to experts from different fields. We understand that in the short term, most businesses are in crisis mode, trying to understand and access the different support packages available to you. We understand this must be an extremely stressful and anxious time, and we'll do our utmost to alleviate some of that stress by offering as much advice as possible and by signposting you to the relevant people and organisations that can help. Over the medium to long term, as businesses adjust to working from home, the Chamber will look to offer a wider variety of webinars and online training courses to help further support and develop your business in this new environment we find ourselves in. With regards to today's webinar, following the coronavirus outbreak, the government announced a number of support packages for both businesses and employees. One of the key support packages announced was the job retention scheme, and that is where we are focusing our attention today, with a particular focus on the furloughing of staff. I'm delighted to be joined by 2 expert speakers, Jay Bhayani and David Robinson. Jay is a specialist employment law solicitor and head of Bhayani HR and employment law. Over the last few weeks, Jay and her team have been very busy interpreting the daily changes and measures put in place by the government. The firm looks after many of the region's businesses and also runs the British Institute of Innkeeping Employment Law Helpline. With 10,000 members in the hospitality sector, the coronavirus pandemic has been disastrous, and Jay's easy to understand and practical legal approach has been really helpful to many. Jay, you're very welcome. David is a tax director at Shorts Chartered Accountants, a chartered tax advisor and chartered accountant. David has worked in the tax profession for in excess of 12 years and advises clients on all aspects of taxation. David prides himself on providing quality, commercial and pragmatic tax advice in order to help his clients achieve their personal and business objectives. David is part of the team at Shorts who are leading on the COVID-19 support measures announced so far by government. David, thanks for joining us. So, the format of today's webinar is simple. I'll shortly introduce each speaker who will give an update on various aspects of the job retention scheme, and then it's over to you. I'd like this to be as engaging as possible, and I want to ensure participants take as much information away as they can. So, please submit any questions you have via the chat box. I'll aim to get through as many as possible. If you're not comfortable posting a public message that everyone can see, you can send private messages to myself or either one of the keynote speakers to remain anonymous. We will aim to finish on time, so therefore, should there be any outstanding questions, I can happily put you in touch directly with the speakers following the webinar. So, without further ado, I'd like to start by asking you, Jay, just start from the beginning. What exactly is furlough and what are the legalities around it?
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. Morning. Yeah, furlough. It's not something that was a recognised term within UK employment law. I think it is in common usage in America, in the same way as we use the word layoff. So, you know, for an employment lawyer, it came as a big shock when the Chancellor started talking about, you know, the term furloughing. And I think employment lawyers across the country were doing searches thinking, well, what on earth is this? And actually what we've learned is that although there's no sort of definition of it, it essentially just means it's a leave of absence for a temporary period of time that the government have introduced as a special measure to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. The whole purpose of it is to try and encourage employers to keep their employees within the workforce. So what we found in the couple of weeks leading up to the introduction of the furlough, in my experience, particularly dealing with hospitality businesses, was that people panicked, they closed their doors straight away, or they made their staff redundant. And so when the furlough scheme was announced, it gave some comfort to people where they thought, well, okay, well, we don't want to lose our staff, and that's certainly what the drive from the government has been. So let's hold our position. We've got a 3-month window in which to, keep staff at home essentially, so that it's helping with the whole social distancing, physical distancing. But at the same time, we then should be able to recover some money. So in a nutshell, the way that the scheme should work is that employer has to carry on paying the salary payments to their employees. They can then submit via a HMRC portal a claim for a grant of 80% of the employee's salary, and that's capped at £2,500 per employee. So the problem that we found is that although in principle that all sounds great, and it is, I think it's a fantastic move by the government, to try and help people. The problem has been, first of all, the delays. So lots of businesses don't have the cash flow to meet the salary payments. We're being asked all the time, well, what do we do if we just haven't got the money? And one of the things that we've said is, well, first of all, look at whether you can access the grants available, the VAT holidays, the business rates, grant and holiday, business interruption loans. Try and agree as a last resort. If you can't do that, agree some unpaid leave with your employees until you can get the grants. But it is your duty to make those salary payments, and that's been one of the key questions. And when perhaps Dave can shed some light on whether any of their clients or whether they've got any other knowledge as accountants, but certainly my understanding is that the employer is obliged to make the salary payments. And then the other problem is that there's lots of little detail that just hasn't been defined, and the government have clearly been so busy throwing so much at us in terms of how they're going to help us with shed loads of money. But actually, lots of the little things we just don't know the answers to. So what we've done at Bhayani Law is tried to interpret as much as we can for our clients. And, we're constantly saying, well, look, we can't guarantee that is exactly how it's going to work. But our best guess at the moment is that this is how the scheme is going to work. And this is what we think you should do with your workforce. So arising from the furlough scheme, as I can see already on the chat box, there are loads of little questions. And I think what we should do, Sam, is really just move on to those questions, unless Dave wants to say anything in response to what I've said so far, and really work through them and see what we can answer. And between Dave and myself, if we can't answer them, I'll revisit them, or anybody that wants to contact us separately can do that. But if there's something I can't answer, I'll be honest and say, I really don't know the answer to that. Let's go and look it up and see if there is an answer, or whether you just have to wait for a bit.
Thanks, Jay. David, did you want to add anything before we move on to questions?
Not loads. I think, I'd probably just mirror everything that Jay's just said. Clients, in our experience, there's a lot of uncertainty around the job retention scheme, a lot of questions, not many answers at the moment, I'm afraid, because obviously the government are working on guidance and working on the details as we speak. There was a few details that came out last Friday that we can get to in some of these Q&As later, shortly. I think just a couple of things for me to add in on the detail there from what Jay was saying. So, yeah, it is a grant. So it covers 80% of an employee's wage up to £2,500 per month, like Jay said. It covers wages, but it also covers employers' national insurance and the minimum pension contributions that you have to make under auto enrolment. And just to be clear, the employer's NIC and the pension is paid on top of the £2,500 cap. So, so that's something that employers will benefit from. It's open to everybody, any UK employer, as long as you had a payroll on the 28th of February. So if you've started in business after the 28th of February, unfortunately, this is not going to benefit them. Likewise, if anyone has taken on employees after the 28th of February, that won't benefit them either, unfortunately. But as Jay said, really powerful scheme, really supportive measure. The problem is the cash flow before we get the payments, and trying to make sure that businesses can operate in the meantime. So I think that's just all I wanted to add in terms of some of the nuances. I think a lot of we've got 14 questions already, so I think some of the details from there.
Yeah, we'll make that, and I'll go to the beginning. The first question that came in, which was from Magna Colours. So they've asked if we have furloughed staff, but those continuing to work experience COVID symptoms, is it possible to bring in furloughed staff prior to the first 3 weeks to swap out with them to ensure continuity of the business? So probably Jay, for you.
Yeah, so the question of whether people can be furloughed for less than 3 weeks is one of the ones that keeps coming up, and I suppose linked to that. I can't find an definitive answer to that. I don't know if Dave knows, but my view is, having looked at it, the intention is that you furlough people for a 3-week continuous period. Although it doesn't use the word continuous, I think that's what it's suggesting, and the grants will be paid in 3-week blocks. So whether in Magna Colours scenario, yes, if their furloughed staff experience symptoms, then obviously you have to then put them on sick pay, statutory sick pay. Could you bring in furloughed staff? I think if the needs of the business dictate that you should, then that's what you've got to do, regardless of whether that causes an issue with the grant further down the line. I don't think you can rely on the fact that the grant, that once we know the nuances of the grant, it may not pay up if you don't furlough somebody for a 3-week continuous period. But I honestly don't know the answer. Dave, do you know anything more about that?
I don't. I think the only thing I would add is that the guidance so far basically just says 3-week blocks. So I would work on the assumption that if you've got an employee that's on furlough for 3 weeks and you bring them back because of the business need, I think that our clients and businesses should work on the assumption there's going to be no grant for those employees.
And David, that's if you bring the employee back within the first 3 weeks,
correct?
You'll be able to claim for the time that they've had off.
I mean, what we know so far on the furlough 3-week chunk is that if someone goes off for 3 weeks on furlough and then you want to bring them back for a week, perhaps to do month-end work or some kind of activity, and then re-furlough them, we think that's okay. But again, there's some further guidance to come out down the line on that.
Okay, just I'll leave that one there if that's okay. Move on to the second question, which was, please can you advise if we have furlough casual work, if we can furlough casual workers or 0 hours contract, and how is that payment calculated?
Yeah, you certainly can. That's now been made very clear. So it's really those eligible to be furloughed are those that are on your PAYE payroll, as Dave says, as at the 28th of February. So 0 hours workers are usually employees anyway. Technically, there are two different sides of them, but we're just sort of saying to people, let's simplify things. As long as they're on your payroll, then they should be eligible. The way that you calculate is set out in the HMRC guidance, and we'll send a link to it. Essentially, it's an average depending on when they started working for you. So there's 3 different categories. I don't know off the top exactly how it is, but it's based on the previous 12 months. But it's very clear how you make that calculation. I'll send the link to everybody to the page that sets out that detail.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is that, now's not the time to go into the detail of how it's calculated. There are steps to make. I think what we're saying to our clients is that if you do want to furlough an employee and you want the government to cover their salary, you need to run the calculations now to make sure that you understand what you can pay them in order to get the grant back in, you know, a few weeks' time. It's not as straightforward as saying I'm just going to pay them 80% of whatever they get. There are some nuances around 0 hours workers, people that are paid based on the hours that they do, or those that have got varied income, I think is the term.
Right.
Is it possible just to ask a question, a follow-up to that?
Yeah, go for it, Ruth.
Is it possible just to ask a follow-up on that point while we're on it? Sorry if I've... I just wanted to ask, what documentary evidence would you need apart from the payroll for casual and 0 hours? Because I've got a few people in that situation, but I haven't got, because they've been with me since about January, I haven't really got what I would say a formal sort of contract with them in, you know, documentation. I've got a letter, but I haven't really got a contract as such. Would that be okay? They are paid through the payroll though.
I think so. Again, we're waiting details on how the claim portal is going to work, but we do think that the claim portal is going to be separate to the payroll. However, if you think about it, HMRC will have all the details of all the salaries that have been and pay that's been paid to anybody in the last, you know, since their records began. So those employees that you've had that you paid in January, the revenue will already know how much you paid them. You know yourself because you've paid them those amounts. So you can work out the average that they are entitled under the scheme. So I think from a tax point of view, from a HMRC claim point of view, I think that'll be sufficient. From a legal point of view, I don't know if Jay's got anything else to add.
There's just no information about how it's going to be evidenced at all, as far as I can see.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Going to move on to the next question. We've got plenty to get through. Louise Dack has asked, is it possible to furlough a member of staff for 2 days that they work in a charity shop and then pay them for being a key worker for 3 days as per their employment contract?
I don't understand the question. So is it somebody that's working for a charity 5 days a week and they're just needing to do 2 days out? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Perhaps, Louise, you could just rephrase, resend, and we'll just move on to another one. We'll come back to you.
Apologies.
It's another question. If only part of staff needs to be furloughed, do we ask permission or do we decide?
Okay, that's quite a common question as well. The rules say that it has to be done by agreement. So the employer decides who they want to furlough, and they can furlough part of their workforce. It doesn't have to be everybody. And yes, you do need to get consent from the employee. So we've got a letter that our clients are using that sets out the date from which they're going to be furloughed, what they're likely to be receiving in terms of pay, how long they'll be furloughed for, and then at the bottom it asks for their consent and for them to sign and return, so that you can show that you've had their consent, because you do need that.
Thanks, Jay. Just to add to that, Mark Evans asks if there is already a layoff clause in their employment contracts, do we still have to agree furlough with individual staff members?
Yeah, you do. And also not to confuse layoff with furlough. They are two separate things. So at the moment, what I'd suggest is forget your layoff clause. That was a couple of weeks ago. We were advising everyone, check your contract. If there's a layoff clause, use it. But now we're saying, forget that, because the employee will get more and you will be able to recover more if you furlough staff, because you're going to get 80% of the salary. On a layoff, it's a very temporary measure and you have to pay a very minimal payment to the employee. So they are different. But in any case, yes, you do, to answer that question, you do need to agree, as I'd said before, with the employees.
David, question for you from David. Is the HMRC link to furlough staff up and running yet?
So there was some guidance issued on Friday or last Thursday overnight, and we can make that link available. The actual portal to make the claims, I've not seen anything this morning. I'd have seen something on LinkedIn, I think, already. We're expecting that towards the middle or the end of the month, I think.
Okay, this might also be for you, David. What Roscoe is asking, what evidence a company is going to have to provide to reclaim the funds?
So there is a list. There is a list of a very, very high level list of things that need to be made available for the claim on the government's guidance website. It's basically things like pay as you earn reference number, employees being furloughed, claim start date and end date, amount claimed, bank account, etc. The usual stuff. What we don't know is exactly how the actual claims will be made through the portal. We just don't know. We'll have to wait and see what comes out on that.
Legal question here for you, Jay. 80% pay for some workers would take them below national minimum wage. Would the employer be breaking the law if they don't top it up? Also, can they ask us to reduce their auto-enrolment contributions down to 0% for the time being?
I'm not sure about that one. I don't know if you know, Dave. What I would say about national minimum wage that I do know is if you were asking them to undertake some training for you, which you're allowed to do while they're on furlough, then you have to pay them at least national minimum wage if you're paying them 80%. So to me, that would indicate that you do have to. I don't know. If Dave doesn't know, I'll check that. I'm sure one of my team knows that.
Clearly, there's stuff to come out on this, but the guidance that I've seen so far is that because a furloughed worker has to be at home and do no work at all, so the guidance I've seen is because they're doing no work, effectively the national minimum wage requirements don't apply. Now, I'm not a lawyer or any kind of lawyer, so don't take me as gospel on that. But there's certainly the guidance that I've seen online says that because there's no work being done at all, minimum wage doesn't apply, apart from if you are asking those employees to do some training at home, like Jay said. And the guidance there is clear on the government's website that you need to factor in minimum wage for that. As for the auto enrolment contributions, that's a good question. I don't actually know the answer. I wrote it down to find out afterwards. I can probably follow up on that. I mean, my gut feeling is that there are some minimum auto enrolment requirements, full stop. So I can see those applying anyway. But hopefully more guidance will come out from the government on that in due course.
Not sure this should be directed at, but what happens if the payroll wasn't run for February and there was new staff starting?
So we're saying that we've had a payroll. Sorry, we've had new starters in February that could benefit from the scheme, but we didn't run the payroll in February. Maybe we did it in March. I mean, again, the guidance is yet to come out on all of the nuances, but I would suspect that is okay. If an employee has been taken on in February and you've got evidence that you've actually taken them on in February, and you had a payroll that had started before February, i.e. you've been in business for a period of time, then I think that should be fine. I would certainly work on the basis that should be that. What the government want to do is that anybody who has started in business from the 1st of March onwards won't qualify, and anybody who's been taken on as an employee from the 1st of March onwards won't qualify. That's the cut-off date. So anything before that should be okay.
Thanks. Ruth Willis asks, is there a clear definition of what employees are covered by the scheme? Is there any way they can access that? Obviously, probably not now is a place to list through everything that is covered, but is there an easy guide somewhere to access that list?
Yeah, as I said, I'll send the link to the gov.uk site, which is where we're sort of directing most people for what detail there is, and there isn't a great deal of detail. But I can't think of any category off the top that isn't eligible, Ruth, apart from, as long as they're on the PAYE payroll. I think that's what's defined as eligible employees. Can I, while I've got Ruth and a question from Ruth, can I just cover charities? Because this is the question. Yeah, this is a question. So we've been helping all our charity clients saying furlough your staff because the clear HMRC guidance at the top says charities and I think public sector organisations are eligible to furlough, the furlough scheme. We've then hit a slight problem in that further down on that, it also says that if employees are paid through public funding, then it's expected that they would carry on being paid by the charity. So we don't really know how much notice to take of that. And so what we've said to our clients is, well, our best advice at the moment is that you should still use the furlough scheme, but we can't guarantee that that's not going to cause a problem if your employees are publicly funded. I don't know what Dave thinks, but my reading of it is very clear that it was very much that, it says that charities are eligible. If you haven't got work for that individual within your charity, then you ought to be eligible for the furlough. I suppose what it's saying is that if you've got public funds that are committed to paying salaries, then you'd be expected to use those salaries, that funding for the salaries, rather than in the rest of your organisation. So I don't know how that will come out either.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a number of contracts with local authorities, just for argument's sake, and I would advise people is to contact your contact at the local authority or health or wherever, and just talk to them, because what we've done is we've got their assurances that they won't be withdrawing any money, and even possibly in some cases they've been quite lenient in what they're expecting back in terms of monitoring impact information and things like that. I would just advise people to have that dialogue, because there will be certain things you just won't be able to do at the moment. So I would just say that to people, and that's what we've been doing, talking to them in that situation, just to get their assurances in writing to say that they're okay and they will continue to honour their contracts as well, because there's an issue about that if you're not delivering it in the way that they expect you to. So that's really what I would advise people to do, and that's what we've done with, if I take Sheffield City Council as an example, we've had that conversation with them already and got it in writing from them. So that's what I advise people to do. And then the funding, then in a way that person is then taken care of, aren't they? In that sense, if it's funded through the public sector.
Just moving on to some other questions. Jill Kate, yes, we will be, the webinar is being recorded. It will be posted onto the Sheffield Chamber YouTube channel later on this afternoon. Another question about national minimum wage. I'm not sure if this bit was covered, Jay. How will the planned rise in national minimum wage affect furloughed employees? Will they still see this raise?
Well, if the answer to the previous question is that you have to pay them, and I'm going to check that, and I think Dave's right, actually, I'm not sure you do, unless they are engaging with you to do training, having just done a quick search. So I think that if they are affected, then yes, then the raise is going to affect them. And from what I've heard, that planned increase to national minimum and living wage in April is still planned to go ahead, as far as I know.
Thanks, Jay. Good question from Amy Wood. She asks, can you rotate furloughed staff? So have one person on furlough for 3 weeks and then rotate them with somebody else for 3 weeks and keep rotating?
Yeah, now one of my clients told me something yesterday, which I thought was genius from a Machiavellian employment lawyer's point of view. So what they said is, we're going to furlough half our workforce for 3 weeks, and then we're going to furlough the rest of them for 3 weeks, and we're going to see which team performs the best. And if we discover that there are performance issues quite clearly within one team that they're suspecting, then they're going to talk to us about performance management and whether those people are the best people to be within the team. So, employers are finding quite creative ways of using this, which I thought was quite clever. But yes, in answer to Amy, you can do that. You can rotate. Yeah.
Got a question here, and I've had a couple of similar questions to this. This one says, we've had a member of staff leave voluntarily on the 28th of February, and they've gone self-employed. Is that business able to re-employ them and then furlough them immediately so that their income is protected? Because the self-employed work's obviously affected now. So he's asking, can he bring bring somebody back on furlough, then I'm guessing if the cut-off was 1st of March, that would be no, would it?
Certainly. I mean, it's a cracking question, and there'll be loads of people that are in that position. Maybe not going self-employed, but going to a different job or whatever. Because typically you would finish at the end of the month, maybe, and then start a new job. What we know so far is that 28th of February is a cut-off date. So I suspect that perhaps if somebody had done that, they might not be able to. However, I think what I'd probably suggest is that I'm happy to spend a little bit of time after this session and just have a little think about that and maybe get back to that person individually. I don't know what you think, Jay.
I think my instinct would be that if they'd left, then they won't be eligible. But what the rules do say is that if you had made people redundant, so I started off saying that lots of people jumped to redundancy straight away before the furlough scheme came into force, then what the rules now say is that you can actually bring them back, which we didn't think was going to be possible, but it is. So if you've made people redundant, I think in the weeks leading up to it, then you can reinstate them. But if somebody's left of their own accord and they've not been made redundant, I'm not sure that would be the case.
Yeah, I suspect that's the case. Yeah.
Although who's going to check that?
Got quite a unique question here from Trish Hibbert. We are a private hospital, and we have staff that would normally work for one hospital. Would work for more than one hospital, but to reduce the risk of contamination, they're asking staff to choose either work for one only or none at all. Would those that choose to work elsewhere during this pandemic be classed as furloughed?
I think if they're employed by the same employer, but they're just moving site, then no, I can't see, because the point of the furlough scheme is that you've got no work for them. So if you can move them, if I'm understanding that right, what they're saying is that we've got a number of hospitals, we're moving them to a different site, but they're still working for us, in which case they wouldn't come within the furlough rules.
I'd agree with that, and I think one of the things that is kind of linked to that potentially is if you've got more than one job. So if there's more than one employer, what we know about that so far is that if there is more than one employer, there's more than one opportunity to claim the furlough grant. So if you've got two employers and they've got one employee, and that employee works 3 days a week for one employer, 2 days a week for the other. As far as we know, both employers are eligible for the grant, and therefore potentially both employers can benefit from this cash. I think in terms of the hospital question, I don't think I've got anything else to add from what Jay said, really.
We'll move on. Adam, I think your question's been answered on Adam Gillis, that it is acceptable to furlough a certain percentage of your workforce. Sophie Bauer asks, staff who would usually receive commission payments, will the 80% be based on basic or average earnings?
Basic.
Yeah.
Very clear that commission payments aren't included.
Yeah. Any commission bonuses are all excluded. I think what we don't know, and we're getting a load of questions on this, and I suspect the answer is the same, that it's not included, is overtime. So if you've got a basic salary but you get paid overtime, again, the latest we know is that we don't think that overtime will qualify either.
Another question says, can short time be implemented if furloughing ends?
Yeah, if your contract gives you the ability to, if it's got a layoff or short time clause, then yes. If not, then no.
We've also another question. We've got some pregnant staff who are nervous about coming to work for fear of getting infected. Can they be furloughed? And also, what about people that can't work due to a lack of child provision?
Well, I think you need to look at each situation and decide what category do they fall into. So are they choosing to take unpaid leave, for example, because they can't work because they've got childcare responsibilities, in which case they don't fall within the definition of the furloughed workers, because you've got work to give them, but they can't fulfil that. So you might have to agree something else, like unpaid leave, or you might choose to pay them as an employer if you've got the funds to do that, but you can't put them through the furlough scheme. If you've got somebody who's pregnant but not on maternity leave yet, then I think the rules are that they might fall if they're worried about being in a workplace, although in most cases people are working from home, but where they're not, then they fall within, the rules on sort of self-isolation or shielding possibly, in which cases, again, it's a different category, so they will be eligible for sick pay. If they're already on maternity leave, that's a question we've been asked quite a lot, then the normal maternity pay rules apply. You wait until they return from maternity leave, and then you can furlough them. So you don't furlough them while they're on maternity leave.
Sort of, in addition to that question, if a worker develops symptoms, should they be furloughed rather than put on statutory sick pay?
No, the other way.
They're not penalised financially.
I think it's the other way around. So if they're furloughed and then they develop symptoms, you should put them on sick pay. If they've got symptoms, they shouldn't be furloughed, because, as I say, the point of furlough is a holding position for the employer where they're not able to give any work to the employee to do, not because the employee can't do it, but because the business doesn't have the work available.
So somebody asks, how does furlough work if staff don't agree to the process?
Yeah, we've already seen that. So most employees are going to agree, because most employees will benefit more from 80% of a salary than not. If they don't agree, then you've got to look at your options. One might be you make them redundant because you haven't got work to give them. One might be, well, I mean, the first thing is to just try and negotiate with them, find out why they're not, and work out what that objection is. But I think if they don't agree, you can't force them to be furloughed. But if you haven't got the work to give them, then you've got to do something with them. So the natural thing to do is to look at ending their employment, probably by way of redundancy. So where we're going to see that, I think, occasionally is where somebody's been in place for a long time and thinks, well, I'd rather have my redundancy, that's what I wanted anyway. And this is all thrown a spanner in the works, and I'm not going on furlough because, I'd rather end my employment. But I think you need to take advice on that individual situation if that arises.
Louise, thanks for sending that update. I will come back to your question. I just want to revisit your initial question. Neil Jones asks, if an employee was given notice of redundancy effective in 3 months' time after the 28th of Feb, can they be included as a furloughed employee?
Good question. I don't see why not.
Yeah.
So I mean, everything that the Chancellor's announced is that if you have made somebody redundant on or after the 1st of March, then you can take them back on again, and those individuals can qualify for furlough rather than being laid off, in the previous sense of the word. So I don't see why not. So you're saying effectively on the 3rd of March we made somebody redundant, but we gave them 3 months' time notice to work. From what we know, I think if you just write, I don't know if Jay's got anything to add to this, but if you write to them and say, actually, we're going to put you on furlough instead, and get the employee to sign up to that, I think that should be able to qualify for the grant. I think what I would say is clearly the portal's not ready yet, and the revenue and government haven't fully mapped all of this out. But they will have done by the end of April. That's what we're being told. So you say now you've got 3 months. Someone's on 3 months before they're actually being made redundant. So get my maths right. So the end of May is when they'll probably be going. Maybe beginning of June. So we should know for definite what you can and can't qualify. So I guess watch this space and maybe make a decision on that individual in a few weeks' time.
Just conscious of time, so I just want to try and fly through as many more as possible. Just given that the date you can claim from is the 1st of March, cut-off date. Jill Kay asked, they had a new starter in March. Does this mean that they're not included? And I guess what support is available to those that are not included? Is it universal credit, statutory sick pay?
Yeah, they wouldn't be eligible. And what we're saying to quite a few of our clients is that those that are on very low wages, it might actually be more advantageous for them not to be furloughed and for them to look at universal credit and the ESA, the Employment Support Allowance, because some people are getting a lot more from that because you can get help with housing and other costs and living expenses. Whereas if you're getting 80% of a very small salary, then it's probably not in your interests to claim that. So I think looking again on the gov.uk website, the eligibility criteria is there. Problem is there's a massive queue, to actually speak to anybody to process your application.
David, can a director be furloughed?
Yeah, great question. We're getting this a lot from clients. So first and foremost, the guidance we've got is that an employee or a worker that's going home on furlough can't do any work for the business. Being kind of talking out loud, it's difficult to see how a director can't do any work for the business, because they're always going to be making decisions and kind of obtaining finance, etc. We need more guidance from government on this. However, what we do know is that if a director can be furloughed, and as far as we know, that should be possible. The only amount that the director can qualify for under the grant is their salary, not dividends. And of course, many company owners who are directors as well will be paying themselves a mixture of salary and dividends. So dividends don't qualify for the furlough grant; it's just salary. So I think the message at the moment is pay yourself as normal. Once the grant portal is available and is known towards the end of the month, hopefully we'll be able to get some of that grant funding for your salary as a director, although it might be quite minimal because of how you pay yourself.
Ruth Willis asks that they've got trainers that they use on a drawdown basis who may be stuck for funds. Would they need to go through the self-employed route to get support, or is it possible to support them by furloughing?
So we're talking about consultants here, I'm guessing, who are either self-employed, who have got their own little limited company. I think, Sam, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think there's going to be some another session next week on the self-employed part. But what I can say right now is that if you are consulting one of those trainers and they have their own little limited company, they can't benefit from the self-employed scheme. They would have to benefit from their own furlough scheme, which, as I've just said, might be quite limited benefit. If they are self-employed in the actual sense of the word, in that they haven't got their own limited company, then yes, they can qualify for self-employed scheme. And now's not the time, I don't think, to go into the full details on that. If you have got those individuals, certainly point them at that self-employed scheme. And what we're saying is that everyone needs to talk to their accountant to understand what that means for them.
Yeah, Dave's right. We will be running another webinar next week around the self-employment income support scheme. Last chance to submit last couple of questions. I'm trying to get through them. Is it possible to ask, probably for you, Jay, is it possible to ask any employees to work part-time instead of furloughing?
Is it possible to
ask staff to work part-time?
Again, by agreement, you could ask them to work part-time and take a reduction in salary. If they don't agree to that, it's going back to your default position as you would had this all not happened, in that it's a change to their terms. So you'd have to follow a bit of a process to get them to change their terms and conditions. But you need advice on that.
Final one for you then, Jay. If an employee is on long-term sick, another sick note runs for another 3 weeks, can they be furloughed when the note runs out, or should the employer submit a further sick note?
No, if they're not sick anymore because they're sick note runs out and they're not at work because the sick note's run out and they're not sick anymore, then yes, you can furlough them. If they're still sick, then they stay on the sick and you pay them in accordance with the sick pay terms.
Okay, so unfortunately, we are going to have to bring it to a close now. I'm just conscious that everyone is super busy, and obviously the speakers have given up their time voluntarily. Would either speaker, Jay or David, like to add any final comments?
The only thing from me is, so I'm conscious that we haven't covered Louisa's question on the charity 2 days off, 3 days on.
Yes, well spotted.
Perhaps to save everyone else on that, because it might be quite specific, does Louisa want to stay on the call, or I'm happy, I guess, me and Jane are happy to give her a call afterwards?
Yeah,
Happy to stay on the call then, Louise, that'd be great.
yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, so I will circulate any useful links and documents that have been shared in the chat box, and any other useful links or documents that either speaker would like to send out to you. And I will send that out to you shortly and include both speakers' contact details, so they have agreed that you can contact them directly should you have any burning questions. As mentioned, a recording of the webinar will be viewable on Chamber's YouTube channel shortly. I'd just like to sincerely thank both speakers for giving up their time this morning, and I hope you found their advice useful. A reminder that a list of upcoming Chamber webinars can be found via the Chamber's events calendar on our website, and this will be updated daily. We have another webinar tomorrow morning at 9 AM, focusing on the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme with a keynote speaker from the British Business Bank. And next week we've got the Strategy for Survival webinar and one on the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme as well. But please book early to avoid disappointment because numbers are limited. So until next time, thanks for joining us this morning. Stay safe, everybody, and have a great day. Goodbye.